Hey everybody, I'm Grandmaster Ben Feingold, and we have a very large class today. Keep it down, guys. Our subject of today's lecture is on Johannes Donner, who I learned today, real name is Johannes Donner, and his middle name is Hendrikus. I knew he was Dutch. The sponsor's name is Mark Govers. Thank you, Mark, for sponsoring the lecture. If you'd like to sponsor a lecture, contact my wife, Karen. Her email is karen@hclchessclub.com, and you can sponsor a lecture about whatever you want to sponsor a lecture on. Now, Donner was, before my time, he basically stopped playing chess when I started playing chess. And he actually lived longer than I thought he did, because basically my whole life in chess, I never heard of Donner playing chess like when I was playing chess. But it turns out that he died in 1988 and he was only 61 years old. But a few years before that, when he was 56, I guess my dogs are mad. When he was 56, he got a stroke, and he spent the rest of his life in a facility. He called it kind of a nursing home. Donner was an old school person, so he was incredibly sexist, and he was incredibly outspoken about things he didn't necessarily know about. So he would have been perfect for Twitter. He'd be the number one guy on Twitter. He'd be the number one most liked and the number one most hated. And he has like a lot of famous quotes because he was also a writer, and he wrote a lot of columns for the Dutch press. There's a book which I haven't read, but everybody says is like the best book ever, that he wrote in Dutch, and New in Chess in 2006 published an English translation called The King Chess Pieces. The Dutch book is called De Koning, which obviously means king. And if you can purchase that book either in Dutch or in English, I highly recommend it. Though if you purchase it in Dutch and don't speak Dutch, I don't know. But Donner said a lot of very sexist things about women in chess and women in general. I was told, but I don't see anything online, but I have Dutch friends and grandmaster friends. I was told many, many years ago that Donner was very tall. Obviously he's Dutch, but his name came up like when they were talking about the biggest GMs, because he was slightly or a lot overweight and he was incredibly tall. So I've been told he was about 6'6", and I guess he weighed over 300 based on what I've heard. Of course, these are rumors and innuendo. So if you're on my YouTube and you're a Dutch guy who knows Donner, like you've met him, you can say, oh no, he was only 6'3", and he only weighed 275 pounds. Or you could say, I don't know what that means, he was this many centimeters. Okay, you can do that too. Anyway, he was a very interesting figure. And his father, I'm sorry, not his father. It says he was the uncle of the former Dutch Minister of Social Affairs and Empowerment, Hein Donner. Oh, I thought the person was older than him, but this says he was the uncle, so it was his nephew. So that'll learn me. Anyway, he died very young and got sick very young, probably due to his height, weight, and smoking. And I assume there had to be some drinking in there, especially for a lot of the things that he said. I have a very funny story about Donner, which may or may not be true, but it doesn't matter. When I was living in Belgium, this guy told me a story. Donner was giving a simul, and they brought a kid who was living in an institution because he had some kind of, issues. He didn't speak, and all he did was do some chess stuff as far as fun things are concerned. And he wanted to play Donner in the simul, and the facility brought the kid to the simul and crushed Donner. And when the game ended, the kid said something, and this was a kid who didn't talk. And he said, Mr. Donner, when I study chess, all I do is I look at your games. And Donner was very pleased because Donner was one of the top players in the Netherlands for 20 years. And the kid said, and I don't understand how a grandmaster can play so badly. So the truth hurts. And as the person said who sponsored this stream, Donner was famous for blundering and losing quickly. However, Donner also beat lots and lots and lots of grandmasters, and he drew a game with Fischer, which we're going to look at. And he played on a lot of Dutch Olympic chess teams, so he was one of the best players in the Netherlands forever. And he played in the Dutch Olympic team for 11 times. So he was one of the top 5 players in the Netherlands, according to this, from 1950 to 1978, which is a very long time. Most of what I heard about Donner is stories that I can't verify. If you go to the Wikipedia article, there's all these quotes from Donner. Some of them I can't read because, I would get in trouble. But my favorite is about Lodewijk Prins, who I've heard of. He was Dutch champion, and Donner didn't like him. And he said, that guy's the worst. He's the world's worst player. He doesn't know his knight from his bishop, and so forth. And he was very adamant in his opinions about things. So not only did he have very wrong opinions about women, not just being in chess either. His worst take ever is about chess computers. And he said, computers cannot play chess at all, and they will never be able to, at least not for the next 2,000 years or so. For that would take a technology that is still far beyond the horizon, and so forth. So Donner said some things that are suspicious. This is a picture of Donner, when I think of Donner. This picture here. Here's a very old picture of Donner from 1960. I mean, I would never know that's Donner. Doesn't look anything like Donner. I guess somebody's mowing their lawn. Okay. As you can tell, I'm at home. Anyway, the article's not as big as I think it should be, based on the fact that he played in 11 Olympiads and was such a big figure as an author also. Okay, let's look at some of his games. And according to Wikipedia, Donner said, these are my 2 favorite games. So I figured we'd look at them, because it makes sense. Or I could stop talking and we could listen to the guy doing yard work and my dog's barking. That's also good. Yeah, there we go. Okay. And I think they're related. I think my dogs are barking because of the people doing the lawn. So it's probably us. It's probably the leave guys. So, all right. Both of these games were played in the same tournament, which to me is suspicious. That his 2 favorite games of his career were from the same tournament. But, what do I know? Okay, this is from a Zonal tournament in 1957, I believe, against a guy I've never heard of, Octav Troianescu. Troianescu is a Romanian name. So, okay, and Donner's white. And it started as a Nimzo Indian, which is coincidental because my course on the Nimzo Indian for Chessable will come out next month. Okay, Donner played E3, the Rubinstein variation, which I think is the first chapter in my course. And in my course, I'm always recommending b6. So if you buy my course and you memorize my course and then you forget everything, just play b6. And your memory will be, jog that memory back. Okay, black played c5, which is very common. And they got an isolated queen pawn position, which happens a lot in double queen pawn openings when the pawns are, can all take each other. Somebody's going to get an isolated pawn usually. Okay, takes, and white could also take on b4, take on c3, but he decided to just take back. Takes. And we basically have a position that can come from 3 or 4 openings. This could come from a Caro-Kann Panov attack. This could come from the Nimzo-Indian, which it did. This could be a Queen's Gambit declined or a Queen's Gambit accepted. And frankly, white is a tempo ahead because white likes to play a3, so he stops knight b4, and also the bishop can go to a2, especially after a6, b5, or knight a5. And black played bishop b4, bishop e7. So from normal theory, black is a tempo down. It doesn't matter that much, but I'd rather not be a tempo down. So it should be black's move in this position, but it's white's. White played rook e1, a6 to play b5, bishop a2, and after b5, it's well known, although it probably wasn't well known in 1957, that you should play d5, because b5 doesn't attack the bishop because the bishop went to a2, and now this diagonal's open, which is going to be good for white. Takes. You could take with the bishop or the queen. He took with the queen. And now you can see black has issues already. For example, if black tries to trade down, it's actually losing immediately. I got this action going on, and if you defend your knight, I simply take it, and then I take your bishop on e7. Because your knight's defending your bishop, and your knight's pinned. And I can capture your knight. So you can't do this for black. So he played bishop b7, and white played aggressively with queen h5. White's going to attack on the king side with this bishop. This bishop can go to g5. The knight can go to g5. And white's queen's better than black's queen, and white's bishop on a2 is fantastic. g6, weakening the king a little bit. Knight d4, trying to trade pieces. And knight g5, threatening queen takes h7 checkmate. So probably black shouldn't allow that. So black took the knight, which they have to do. Now in this position, your queen's attacked, but if your queen moves away from f6, then bishop f6 wins immediately. Although I guess I could play knight f5, so maybe it doesn't win immediately, but I wouldn't allow it. But he played queen b6, protecting his knight and stopping bishop f6. Rook d1. So white has the 2 bishops, and white's pieces are all in good positions. Rook c8, rook e7. Now in this position, the queen is overworked. It's defending the knight and the bishop. So if it was white's turn to move, white would take the bishop, black would recapture, and then white would take the knight. There's no rook c1 back rank because white has 2 defenders. That's actually important for the rest of the game, that there's no rook c1 check or queen c1 check. Okay, black played queen d6, and black's idea is if you take my bishop, then black plays knight e2 check, and then queen takes rook checkmate. So Donner didn't do that. Donner played king h1, stopping knight e2 check and knight f3 check, and now rook takes bishop as a serious threat. Queen c6, threatening checkmate. Rook takes b7, always sacrifice the exchange. And now there's no checkmate because the bishop on b7 is gone. Knight f5 is called an intermezzo. So if you take the rook and I take the knight, white has 2 bishops for a rook, and white's threatening rook h4 and bishop f6. So black has nothing. So knight f5 was the intermezzo that black counted on. Black said, I'm attacking the queen, my knight's not attacked, and I'm attacking the rook. So looks good. Okay, and Donner played brilliantly bishop d5. So no matter what black does, capture-wise, white's going to be up material. And I'll show you the 3 captures. Knight takes queen is 1 capture. Takes, takes, takes. White's up a piece. Okay, another capture is queen takes bishop. Then rook takes, knight takes, bishop takes. The bishop defends c1, and white's up a piece. And the other capture is queen takes rook, bishop takes, knight takes, bishop takes, and white's up a piece. So all the captures don't work, and bishop d5 threatens the queen. So black counterattacked and played queen c2. You can see why this is Donner's favorite game. It's very exciting. Now, white's up a piece, but black's threatening to take with mate, and black's threatening the queen. So that's serious. Okay, and Donner played rook c1 because the queen and bishop defend the rook. Queen e2, and now black is threatening knight takes queen, and black is threatening rook takes c1 check, bishop takes c1, and black's queen gives mate on the back rank. So black keeps getting lots and lots of threats, but Donner is up a piece. And Donner played bishop f7 check. Now in this position, black should resign, but it's good that he didn't. King takes is illegal because there's a rook on the 7th rank. So black has 2 legal moves. Okay, he played king h8. If he takes the bishop, then I take the rook with check, and you can block with the queen or you can block with the rook, but okay, c'est pas différence. All right, so he played king h8, and Donner finished the game off with bishop f6 check. And it's not mate because black can play knight g7, but black resigned because then everything is mate. So that was a rather brilliant game against a very unknown player. I've never heard of this guy, but it was a real interesting tactical game, and that's the way Donner liked it. Donner said he liked interesting games. He said the worst kind of game is when you're completely winning and you win easily. He hated that. If he was worse, that was good. If he was better, that was good. If it was boring, it was good. If it was exciting, it was good. He liked playing chess. He liked the fight. And that was a big fight, and he came out victorious. Okay, his other favorite game of all time was against a famous player, Bent Larsen. And this was played in 1957. Larsen was probably at his peak in the mid-60s to early 70s. So I'm guessing Larsen wasn't, top 10 in the world in 1957. Although I could be wrong. I don't think he was. Okay, Donner's white, and they played a King's Indian. Okay, and this is the way Botvinnik liked to play against Tal. So I'm sure everybody knew everybody's games. This is still like a main line. A6, D5, C5. This is the Pano variation. Queen C2. And I think white doesn't usually take on B5 in modern theory, but I could be wrong. He took and played bishop B2. Larsen got his queenside play, knight to D1. White wants to play knight E3 and get his knights to the C4 square. Bishop A6, threatening E2. Rook E1. Bishop H6. E4. Bishop takes the knight, an unusual decision. And C4. That's why he took the knight so he could play C4. E5, and the game was stopped by the arbiter because it was too exciting. So in this position, Larsen played knight E8, But I'm assuming if he played the more obvious c3, that fails tactically, because Donner can take and then take, and this knight's hanging and this knight's hanging. So black would have, white would have two connected pass pawns on the queen side. That's probably not good for black. Okay, so he played knight e8, queen d4, c3, and Donner sacrifices a piece. Takes, takes. So white wants to move the e pawn and open up this diagonal with a checkmating attack. So as compensation for a piece, white has the two bishops, two connected pass pawns. He's advancing in the center, and he has trying to have a mating attack. Larsen played f6, never play f6. This was an unknown idea in 1957. Queen a7, trying to attack all these pieces. Another idea is white can take and get their rook to the e7 square, also aggressive. Knight takes b3, Larsen gives the piece back. If Larsen doesn't want to give the piece back, I'm not sure what he should do, because if he plays the obvious move, rook a8, the queen is overworked. So I can take the knight and white gets the piece back. Whichever way is captured, white can capture the other piece. So I guess there's nothing really black can do about his piece, so he got a pawn for it. Rook a8 now. Still plays bishop a5. They trade queens. And now it's equal material, but white has two bishops. White has a passed pawn. White has access to this nice diagonal, and white's pinning the bishop. So it's not good for black. Plays f4, opening up the position. Knight g7 with a discovered attack against the bishop. Knight f5, white's a pawn ahead. And now white has two bishops and an extra pawn, so he should win the endgame. Activates his rook. He wants to play bishop d4 and rook g7 check, which I think he does. Rook takes. Now white's threatening rook h8 check, winning the rook. So bishop b7, rook f1 check. And now this move is really cool. This isn't a move you see every day. Now white's a pawn up. White has a mating attack. And if you're new to chess, black cannot castle. And there's several reasons why black can't castle. One is he already castled. But okay, he moved his king several times. So here, Donner played a very creative move. And if I have to describe Donner's chess play in one word, it's creative. Bishop g7. That's not a move you would think of because it blocks the rook. But he has a very simple idea. He's going to play rook f8 check, and when the king moves up, my bishop's going to move back, and it's actually going to be checkmate. So let me give you an example. Rook takes pawn, check, checkmate. It's a funny checkmate. Bishop g7, very creative move. Okay, so Larsen played rook d8 because he saw what Donner was going to do, and he was like, I'm going to run away to c8. Unfortunately, we don't play bishop h6, which lets Larsen run away to c8. We play bishop f6, and now the truth hurts because we're attacking the king. Black has one legal move, and then rook takes rook is checkmate. So the funny thing about both games, which I just realized, is both opponents against Donner in this tournament resigned one move from checkmate. They made sure they were going to get checkmated, then they gave up. But I really like this bishop g7, rook f8 maneuver. That's pretty awesome. And also, it's a very complicated game where Donner sacked a piece, and he beat a very famous player. Now, some of you are like, I've never heard of Bent Larsen because I don't know anything about chess. Can you show me a game he played against somebody I've heard of? And the answer is yes. Even if you don't play chess, You've probably heard of his next opponent, Bobby Fischer. And flipboard. Donner had the black pieces. This was at the second Piatigorsky Cup in 1966, which I believe was in Santa Monica, maybe. Those tournaments were very strong. Piatigorsky was a patron of chess, and I think these tournaments had a lot of people who would later become or currently were world champion. Petrosian, Spassky, Fischer, etc. Okay, so Donner, in theory, should be a relatively easy opponent for Fischer because the other players in the tournament are like top 10 in the world. You know, Donner was, top 5 in the Netherlands, but I would never say he was top 10 in the world. Okay, maybe I'm wrong. Okay, so Fischer's white. Ruy Lopez. Standard Fischer game. This is the main line, especially in the 60s. Okay, and Donner played the Marshall Gambit. A lot of players today at the Super GM level won't allow Marshall because they think that black equalizes. In 1966, I think the prevailing theory of the top players in the world is that white can get an advantage. Obviously, they didn't have engines, so they had to do their own analysis. Okay, so this is the main line of the Marshall. C6, D4. Nowadays, a lot of grandmasters will try D3, and a lot of grandmasters in this position will move their rook somewhere else. But rook E1 is the old main line. So in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, this was very common, this position. Okay, bishop E3, bishop G4, queen D3. Like, even I know this. And the idea is, if black plays bishop E3 to give checkmate, white plays queen F1. Then there's no checkmate. Okay, and then he played knight takes E3, which is a move I don't know. I think, theoretically, black plays either rook E8 or F5, or both. First one, then the other. I don't know the move knight takes E3. I've never seen that. Okay, Fischer took with the rook. So black has two bishops and some kind of attack against white's king, and white has an extra pawn. C5. I've never seen this way of playing knight takes in C5. Obviously, if you play C5 here, you lose your knight. So this is the point of knight takes, is to play C5. Now, black is threatening C4, which especially in this instance would be explosive. So queen F1, white wants to trade queens, go into the pawn up endgame, plays queen H6, knight D2, rook D8, and white says, I'm up a pawn, you don't have enough compensation. They get to opposite colored bishops. White has an extra isolated pawn. And white has two advantages here. One is the extra pawn, but the other is this bishop is bearing down, and this bishop on D6 isn't doing much. So if I could cheat and put the bishop on D6, capture the pawn on D4, this would be incredibly equal. But since I can't do that, I prefer white. On the other hand, it's almost impossible for white to utilize his extra pawn because you go to D5, blocking your bishop, and that's it. So that pawn's not going to promote. And so if white doesn't win these pawns or put tremendous pressure on F7, black should have good drawing chances. Queen D2, attacking two pawns. Rook D3. And he goes back. He decides not to take the pawn on B2. I guess if you take the pawn on B2, I would play rook B1. The queen only has one square that I see. And then bishop takes F7 check would win the queen. So queen D2 didn't get the job done. Queen goes back to G5. Rook C1, rook c8. And Donner just says, I can draw this because it's opposite bishops. White is still up a pawn on d4. Now white is threatening bishop takes f7 check with the discovered attack on the rook on c8. Queen f5 attacks the rook, defends the rook, and defends f7. Pretty good move. Bishop d3, rook takes, and I'm guessing Fischer may have overlooked that, or maybe it didn't matter. If Fischer saw rook takes rook, then it makes sense to me that he would play something here like queen d1, defending, and have winning chances. After rook takes rook, there are no winning chances. If you take the rook, you're down a piece, so you can't do that. So he takes the queen, rook c1, and this is just a draw. Yeah, the extra pawn's meaningless because my bishop and my king can both block it. You can't win this pawn because I can play a5 whenever I want. After h6, they agreed to a draw. Because, I mean, Fischer likes to take those h pawns, so you got to play h6. Make sure he doesn't. And basically, the next two moves for black are king here. The pawn's going to go here, and white can't do anything. White's extra d pawn is meaningless because my king just sits on d6 forever, and I move my bishop around. So it looked relatively easy, but I think Fischer had the advantage, and just they kept trading and trading and trading until they got this dead drawn position. And in 1966, drawing Fischer with black was not easy. Fischer was definitely top 5 in the world in 1966. I guarantee it. My dad thought Fischer was top 5 in the world in 1963. So in 66, he definitely was. So to me, and you can argue, you could go in the chat on YouTube and say, I don't agree. This is his biggest success, is playing one of the greatest players of all time and drawing with black, as opposed to beating up on Rufus and Doofus. I've beaten Rufus and Doofus, but I've never played somebody who was like 2750 plus with black and drawn them in a slow game. I'm never going to do that. So very, very good on Donner. Okay, now normally I spend my whole life showing you games I won and showing you games my students won and showing you game my family wins. And when I do a lecture on somebody that's a sponsored lecture, I put them in a good light. But Donner's most famous game, in my opinion, whoa, I crushed the microphone there. The microphone doesn't agree. In my opinion, Donner's most famous game is a game he lost. And it actually, one of the reasons I play this opening with white sometimes is because of this game. This was in the Olympiad in 1978. And at this time, the reason this game is famous is basically for eternity, China did not play chess. China might play Chinese chess, China might play Go, but they didn't play chess. And then in the 70s, the Chinese government said, how about we play chess? See if we can get good at that. Well, how did that work out? Now China is definitely in men's chess, women's chess, all chess, kids chess, top 3 in the world. So it worked out pretty well. So in 1978, China entered the Olympiad, and people were like, China, they don't play chess. How can they play an Olympiad? Okay, and so one of the people to make fun of the Chinese players, because they can't compete with grandmasters, was Donner. Because earlier in the event, a Chinese player beat an Icelandic grandmaster, and Donner went to tease the Icelandic grandmaster about that. And then later in the tournament, got his comeuppance. And so this is a very exciting game. And in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, in the Olympiads especially, because, people didn't go to China to play chess. So if you were going to see a Chinese player play chess, it's probably in the Olympiad, and it was probably their best players. playing in the Olympiad. And so the joke was that Chinese players play wild and crazy tactics, except they're good at it. They calculate well and they beat you. And that's the way Chinese players play, which is not true now, although a Chinese player is the world champion. But Chinese players now aren't known for sacking all their pieces and playing like lunatics, but in the 70s and 80s and 90s they were. And one of the things that gave Chinese players that reputation was this game, okay, where a well-known grandmaster lost very quickly to a Chinese player. So Donner played the Pierts, okay, and I've played this way with white just because of this game. There's no other reason. I wouldn't know how to play this way if it wasn't for this game. Okay, so white wants to push all his kingside pawns because that's what he does. And sort of a very modern way of looking at chess from 1978, this is how grandmasters play today. They play h4 and g4 and play like maniacs. Well, that's what this guy did. Now, you can't play g4 because it's hanging. Although in 100 years, computers will play g4s. I don't know. Okay, he played bishop e2. And this looks boring. Like white's going to play knight f3 and castle, and everybody's going to go to sleep. Then he played g4. And before this game, I don't think anybody ever played bishop e2, g4. But the Chinese players were known to attack. Okay, h6, h3, c5, d5. Now it looks like a Benoni. h4. I like the way he plays h3 that he plays h4. I play h4 right away when I have these positions, so I save a tempo. e6, opening up the center, g5. Taking on h6, a g5, isn't something you want to do, but your h-pawn's hanging because it's defended by the bishop. So if you move your knight away, white just wins a pawn by taking on h6. So the h-file's open. Queen d3, white wants to play queen h3, queen h7 mate. You see how easy chess is? Okay, so he plays ed, and that opens up the bishop, so white can't play queen g3, or queen h3. Knight takes, knight c6, queen g3. Now white can play queen h4 or queen h2 with the aforementioned queen h7 mate. Bishop e6, queen h4, threatening queen h7 mate. f5, giving his king an escape square. Queen h7. Queen takes g6 check. First played in the game, gotcha bitch. And I'm guessing Donner didn't see that coming. I mean, I know this game, and I didn't see it coming. So you can see how the Chinese players 30, 40, 50 years ago got reputations as wild tacticians playing aggressively. Because white just went all in when the game started. Okay, so king takes, bishop h5 check. Black only has one legal move, so he played it. King h7. Bishop f7 discovered check. Once again, black only has one legal move, so he played it. Bishop h6. Now, white can take on h6 two different ways. Therefore, he did not take on h6. g6 check. Truth hurts. King g7. If we play king h8, because finally black has two legal moves, then that's checkmate. So king g7, check. Black only has one legal move, king h8. And instead of playing king h8, he resigned, because after king h8, bishop takes f8 is checkmate. So I like the way white went all in on the king side. Black technically was playing correctly by counterattacking in the center and developing, and then white just crashed through. So like these center moves like knight c6, bishop e6, they didn't have anything to do with him getting checkmated, and then he got checkmated. Although in this position he resigned, like the other two decisive games this class, the person resigned one move from mate. So that was a very famous game because it was the first time a Chinese player beat a famous grandmaster in the Olympiad. And after that, people realized the Chinese players are getting good. And now, there's many Chinese players over 2,700 FIDE. So this was the start, 1978, when they were playing in the Olympiad and winning. And before that, in the 60s, there's no chess in China. So they went from like a new country learning chess to like the best in the world. Women's world champion is Chinese, world champion's Chinese, and they've won the Olympiad and the world team championship. So China's fantastic for chess, and they have a lot of good up-and-coming players as well. And unfortunately for Donner, this was one of his famous games that he lost. And that actually says something about how strong Donner was. Because let's say we take a random person on Earth, trying to learn. He's a random person. If trying to learn beats Magnus Carlsen, that game is famous. Everybody in the world knows about that game because if they don't, then trying to learn will tell them about it. They'll be like, oh, do you know I beat Carlsen? Let me show you. Okay, so when you're a really good player, your losses become famous because people are like, how did you lose? You're so good. So when Kasparov would lose, when he was world champion, or Magnus loses, and when Karpov lost, when Capablanca lost, and when Fischer lost, these games were famous because like, how did that guy lose? He's so good. So the fact that you can lose a game and people are like, how? You're a grandmaster. This guy, who's this guy? That means you're a good player. And that's unfortunate when, everybody expects the best players in the world to win. So when they don't win, then their games become famous. The truth hurts.
Do you think he lost because he was playing too quickly and he was overconfident?
He was definitely overconfident, but I don't think he was playing too quickly.
My question is, was Donner blitzing?
Oh, snap. I'll have to ask Rudolf Spielman. That's the best joke I could come up with in 2 seconds. Okay, thanks for watching, everybody. Let's thank our sponsor, Mark Govers, for that lecture on Johannes Donner. He was a character. And unfortunately, the internet wasn't there when he was a character because it would have been fun. I'm Grandmaster Ben Feingold. Please like and subscribe and leave a comment. And I'll see you guys next time with more weekly lectures. Bye, everybody.